Hello, hello. How's it going, Benji? Hello.
Hey Hugh, how you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too
Good.
bad at all.
Happy Thursday. Thursday evening for you, but Thursday still.
It is indeed.
How's life been recently, other than hectic?
Well, for us in the UK, cold.
Yeah,
Colder than
it's
we're used
finally.
to.
Yeah, so what are you hovering at right now?
I think we hit -5 Celsius today.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to talk to somebody on the call that deals in Celsius like I do. Because most of the time I'm talking to people and they're telling me Fahrenheit. I'm like, what? I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah.
Just
Every
never
time
learned
anyone
it.
says Fahrenheit, I'm
I
always straight
know.
on
Yeah,
asking the robot to translate it.
it's exactly the way. That's what I do every time too. So, yeah, it's actually been fairly warm here. It's usually much colder, but yeah, we're only at about. Actually, it went above freezing today, which is bizarre. But yeah, usually
Oh,
we're around -10-ish around this time of year. But
okay.
it's been surprisingly warm. At least we do have a bunch of snow on the ground now, which is good. But yeah, that also took a long time to show up too. So,
Hey Van. Yeah, we are not
hello.
prepared for it here in the UK at all.
Okay, no,
Like,
cold and rain. Yeah. Do you get big snowfalls where you are at all, or not so
we
much?
normally don't get snow or hardly any, and normally if we
Yeah,
do get it, it's like in February or maybe even
yeah,
March.
yeah. So it's a little
So
bit out.
having snow in December is incredibly rare. How you
Oh,
doing, Ivan?
okay.
Yeah, good. And it's good that at least now my internet is working fine.
Yeah, and soon you're gonna have the power of light to serve you
Yeah.
internet. So yeah, Ivan's getting fiber
Fiber
installed.
optic,
So
yeah.
Yeah.
that'll be nice.
It's interesting how things how you change criteria of choosing things. Fiber optics work even if you don't have like electricity and equipment because it's white. Everything is passive between you and provider. So
Yeah,
big benefit
it's crazy
of
that
fiber
that's
optic.
like the shopping criteria for anything is, does it use
Yeah.
electricity? Oh, yeah. Hi, Rob. Not joined. Hello. How's it going, Rob?
Hey, how are you?
Good. Doing okay. Talking about the power of light to serve the internet and fiber optics. So,
And by the way, Benji, I sent like PR with adding myself to agenda. You probably, I don't know if anybody else send those PRs. So like, can you merge it?
Yep,
So I'm
merging it
in the
now.
list. Okay, cool.
yeah, looks
I've
like
been in VR. Like finish my work day into VR, get the VR done, then straight onto the working group call.
oh,
So,
that's fun.
Matt
That's fun.
has just
Looks like
added
Matt
himself.
added himself as well, but he's not here yet. So cool. So it's the last meeting in December. Wow. Gosh, time just flew by.
Nice. Now also added.
So are you hosting today, Lee? There's Benji, sorry, because Lee's not here.
I wasn't
Looking at Lee as the
expecting
host.
to.
Yeah. Yeah, because it still says Lee is the host on the agenda. That's maybe we're
I did
hostess.
originally join a different meeting when I clicked on the calendar.
Yeah, I've got the wrong one when I do that too. So maybe Lee's over there.
Is that the GraphQL Foundation calendar there, or have you got like an old copy of something?
I thought that I
it's
updated it.
Yeah, I thought I did too. Yeah, it's just the one that says when I look at the calendar event, let me just see where it's coming from, the one I added. When I click on the calendar event, it looks like it is the GraphQL Foundation one. Just says WG number 2.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think that's where it came from originally.
And that's the just to confirm, that's the wrong link is in there, is it?
Yeah, I'm gonna double check here just to make sure it hasn't been updated since last for the meeting at the first working group 1 meeting. I clicked on the link in the calendar invite and it was wrong. But today I just went straight to the agenda doc. Yeah. So let me just actually compare the Zoom links here. So 593263. Yeah, it's a
I
different.
think that
it's a
the
different Zoom invite.
calendar is right, but I had used some feature that copies it onto my calendar and I didn't get the update. So I have 2 events, one in my calendar, one in the foundation, and the foundation one is right.
Okay.
Hey folks,
Hello.
are we talking about calendar pain?
Yes. Yes, we are.
Why is this so hard?
I don't know.
I also just got locked out of Zoom. That's why I was 5 minutes late. I was just like frantically trying to figure out how to log back into Zoom, and it OTP'd me like 3 times in a row. It's not been a great day for the calendar / Zoom combo.
Yeah. Well, the good news is the link in the agenda doc always seems to be the right one, so that's good.
Yeah. Benji, are you marked as host since you showed up first? Or is nobody the host?
Don't know.
I don't see the usual like this is being recorded thing.
Oh yeah.
This is the other thing. Yeah, I got locked out of the GraphQL Foundation Zoom, which I'm trying to figure out how to fix.
That's
And
probably not recording.
That's the
because of that.
host. Yeah, and I need that in order to start the recording.
I see a red recording button.
Yeah, but if you click it, it will just say you need host permission, and it doesn't recognize Lee or me as the host.
So it's recording into DevNull or something.
Oh, it is recording. Yeah, it is recording. It says at the top corner. So hopefully, it's fine.
Well, I guess we'll find out where that goes.
Where's it going?
It should work. It's working for GraphQL JS working group. At least it worked last time we tried. I also lost my access to Zoom account from GraphQL Foundation, and we're using this feature of after recording every time, and it's working.
All right. Well, then we'll have a fantastic first couple of minutes of us all looking very confused about how to use software, which is, I think, super relevant for our audience.
It is.
Oh boy. Let me reload our agenda file. Okay, cool. I think we've got a full crew. I think this is just our audience for today, right? I see 6 names in our attendee list. We got 6 here. So
yeah, this is it.
We got quorum. Let's go. All right. We all agree to the 4 top links listed in the agenda. And let's do just a quick names to faces for the value of the recording. I'm first in the list, so hello everybody. My name is Lee.
Hi everyone. I'm Benji.
Hi, all. Hugh here.
Hi, Rob.
Hey, I'm Matt.
Hi, Ivan.
Thanks all for joining. And I believe I don't have the link set up in the doc for live notes, but we've been using
I've sent it in the chat.
Thanks. I'll add it to the agenda file. Has this been working to use like 1 notes file per month across 3 meetings?
I think it's fine. I don't always synchronize it. Like I will often after the first primary meeting and then after all of them are done. I don't seem to do it after the secondary one because it's just too many times. But yeah, I think it works fine.
Cool. All right, we'll keep doing it. I think everybody here has been in the primary meeting, so not necessary for us to do a review of that. Actually, maybe it would be helpful for us to do a review of the APAC time zone secondary one that happened last week. Benji, I know that you were in attendance there. Anything to report? Highlights there? Anything that we should be thinking about?
Well, we skipped over quite a lot of the stuff, like reviewing the previous meeting action items. There wasn't really anything to advance there. I'm afraid I'm a bit behind in filing those. Donna wanted to find out about getting the legal sign-off, which I believe is on Yuli, and
Okay.
I believe that they have filed an issue about it, which is assigned to you, so you should have the relevant thing there. And then the rest of the meeting was, other than mentioning the TSC elections, of course, was discussing Roman's various pull requests to the spec, many of which were just a few lines, some of which were more, looking into the reasons why they may not have been immediately merged, expanding on some of those. So I think a couple of those got merged. Some of them got some good feedback, and some of them are still waiting on advancement by the author.
Okay.
I think the one takeaway was like Roman was pretty frustrated that he had gotten sign off on some of these approval and still could not figure out how to make progress. So like figuring out, okay, if you manage to get one person to approve, especially a person on the TSC or who has merge rights, how, like, what's the process to make sure it doesn't get mired? And in his case, bringing it to the working group was probably a good progress.
Right. I can take some of the blame there. I think historically our process has been someone from the TSC or working group does a review, gives a thumbs up, and then I, as editor, do a final pass and get it merged. Though we've had a handful of cases where that's not been the case, and it's been okay for things that are like very obvious editorial improvements, where y'all can pretty reasonably read my mind and be like, well, this is certainly better than what we had, so let's do it. Those seem good, but I can go take a look through some of the remaining ones if there's anything that's sort of still left on me for editorial review.
It would be good to have, we were talking about like an improved process there as well. And also, it's Git at the end of the day, right? So if you need to revert it, you can. So I think having the TSC and other working group members have more confidence to push these things through would be good. What I was saying to Roman is I like to, if you're not merging it, Lee, I like to see 3 TSC members all approving it. That's sort of my gauge. If no one's saying no, and there's 3 yeses from the TSC, that seems like a good enough vote of confidence from me.
That seems pretty reasonable. Also, we're intentionally kind of ploddingly slow with the spec changes. Like that's by design. So
yeah.
I understand the frustration, but I think we shouldn't over optimize towards like rapid PR merging.
Definitely, and that was it. Really, it was quite a long discussion, but yeah.
Okay, sounds like it was fruitful. We've got actually a decent amount of interesting things to get through today, despite the small audience, which is great. Benji, do you want to talk about field errors from insufficient validation of variables?
Yeah, absolutely. Does someone want to volunteer to take notes? I've just put in some headings, but yeah, it would be nice to have someone go through and take some notes. And
yeah, I can definitely try to help for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, yes. So this is reopening the old wound of nullability versus optionality. I, as you may all know now, I'm working on another implementation of the GraphQL spec, particularly an alternative execution engine. And as such, I am going through with an even more fine-tooth comb than I was previously. And there are some things that are quite interesting, one of which is this one, where effectively a value has two defaults. It has the default that is provided to the variable, and it has the default that the field itself has. And at the moment, we allow the variable to be nullable, which is so that you can not provide the variable, in which case I think anyway, there's a couple of places where that gets interesting, but you can, because it's nullable, pass explicitly null. And if you pass explicitly null, then the variable default doesn't kick in because you've said it is null, rather than omitting it, in which case the default, say 3, would kick in. If you explicitly state that it is null, then the default doesn't kick in and it is null, but then we try and pass it to a field that is non-nullable, and that gives you a runtime error rather than a validation error. It seems, or it seemed to me at first, that it should have been a validation error. Like, we should know it has to be either not null or not specified, but it cannot be null. That's what it seemed like to me. And the queries that we had that supported that, like this one that I've got at the top of this issue, could well have taken a variable that was an int bang equals 3, whereas where you either provide a number, as in a non-nullable int, or you don't provide number at all and the default applies. But yes, that is not the case. That is not the status quo. And so we have this runtime error that feels like it should be a validation error.
Yeah. I thought we fixed this.
We sort of fixed this backwards, Lee. So
we did the other side of it, yeah, the default values.
Yeah, we decided that if you have a default value, then you are allowed to be used in a non-nullable position, so long as the default value is not null. And we did that because I think the reason we put it in the spec this way is because the Facebook server, the way it behaves, is actually when we previously always stripped nulls. So if you explicitly set a variable to null, it was just stripped from the request, in which case it's actually impossible to override the default variable, the default value for a variable. So a variable with a default value is essentially non-nullable on Facebook servers. And we baked that behavior in, and then made like bang means you are required to set it. And we actually, on our Facebook servers, we made it actually a validation error to have bang with a default value, because we wanted bang to mean you must set this variable. Yeah, I think that is, I think that was incorrect. Like that was a buggy choice.
Yeah. Maybe we missed something here, but I remember talking at length about the addition of default values here, and in particular, like this, the hairball of this edge case. And I remember like the motivation to get this right was explicitly to disallow nulls making their way through a well-typed boundary. Like if your schema declares that this can't be null, then allowing a null through is a security risk, because someone could find out that you can throw a null pointer exception and then just spam your server with null pointer exceptions trying to take out your service. So this is alarmingly surprising and high urgency to fix if we have not. I'm curious if we were to assemble this use case, like Benji, as you assembled this example, are you evaluating it as your own read through the spec rules, or are you evaluating this with existing code?
Both. I did it with my read through the spec rules because I was implementing a GraphQL engine. And then I've then written a test case that you can run against GraphQL.js that shows the behavior that I was explaining. It's at the bottom of the top comment there.
Oh yeah. So you do. Okay. Yeah, I thought we had fixed this. Okay. Is there a straightforward solve here? So it's like one of two things needs to happen, right? Either when providing null, it should be interpreted as not provided. And so like the line that reads has value, this is, what's this, step V, 3.v, let has value be true if it has provided a value for the name. Either we can say a value null means has value is false. My sense is it's probably the wrong way, but that would solve this problem, right? It would mean that default values would override a null. Or we must move the assertion later in the process.
Yeah, so I think one option would be to make a validation rule so that if you're using a variable in a non-nullable position, then it needs to be a non-nullable variable. Then you can give it a default if you want to make it optional. But ultimately, the default for that argument won't apply if you've fed a variable in for it. It will only apply if you don't feed anything into it. If we were to do that, though, that would be a breaking change, but it would only break queries. I was going to say it would only break queries that were already erroring, but that's not true. It would be a breaking change because queries that were previously valid, such as this query queue that I have at the top of my issue, would no longer be valid because the validation rule would say you can't define a variable here that is nullable. So I fear we may not be able to do that, in which case I think the only option would be what previously was erroring, which is when you feed a null into this, which is causing the problem, instead does what you say and effectively coerces to the default value, which is, I think, what Matt says that the Facebook servers already do.
That's also a breaking change, though, because this means that if we coerce it to the default value, it means it becomes impossible to pass null into a variable. Like situations where clients are currently passing null in explicitly to a variable that has a default value in a place where it's allowed to be null, would not coerce to the default value, and that, or are not now, but would after this change. So either one of these choices is in fact a breaking change.
Then I think I would prefer the breaking change, which is that of the validation rule, because it's right there, build time, rather than a runtime change.
Yeah, I think this unfortunately may only be fixable when we require a version bump.
We have a note about this in the spec. So I was at least right in knowing that we talked about this before. That's the note. Here's the overall section.
Yeah, because you fix it, it actually sent PR in comments that added, but we had this issue like 4 years ago, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because when Lee mentioned it, I also start remembering we have like really long discussion with like 3 options, and we spent like half a year deciding what to do.
So
I think it's bad that GraphQL.js doesn't implement that, right, Benji? Since you tried it on GraphQL, because we have code sample, so it's not causing error, right?
it is throwing a field error, which is what it should do according to the spec.
It should throw a field error, but it should not throw a null pointer exception runtime error, right? Like, what is important is that you can't, if you have a resolver function that is well typed, like so GraphQL.js, assuming a TypeScript code base, where you say that the argument to this function is, what was the one from your example? Number. Okay, number is the argument to your function, and it is a number. It is not number or null, it is number. And then at runtime, a null gets passed in. And so you want to do like, all right, I want to return double the number. And you multiply it by 2, and it returns nan. And then like shit breaks. That should be explicitly not okay. That can't happen. And if instead there's like a step that catches that ahead of time, where GraphQL says, okay, this is an edge case that we know exists. It is not possible to detect it any earlier because it is a runtime value passed in. So there is no way for validation to catch this because it's about a runtime provided value. Then it's just a matter of like, what's the best case we can do for this particular edge case while still preserving the constraint that user code is well typed and we respect the types of the user code.
Yeah, absolutely. This isn't a null pointer exception, as far as I know.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not a null pointer exception on the server. It is, however, like if you have, for instance, a Java client or a Kotlin client or whatever, where you're like your query builder that you're building up, like the unfortunate thing here is that when we like have the when we generate that code for the query builder, we cannot like. You can't pass null, but there's no way for us to say that to the client. Like I treat this situation as a bug in the spec, basically, because we are enabling the client to give us what it believes is a valid request when we could determine statically this cannot be done.
So the note that we have here, or actually right above the note, there's a section that says in the example below, an optional variable is allowed to be used in a non-null argument because that variable provides a default value in the operation. We explicitly allow this for compatibility with earlier editions of the spec. Authoring tools, aka graphical linters, whatever, may want to report this as a warning with the suggestion to replace the type Boolean here with the type Boolean exclamation point, non-null Boolean, in order to avoid this ambiguity. Because if you took that example 189 in the draft, and added just an exclamation point, everything there would continue to be true, right? Like the default value is there. You could pass Boolean false to that arg if you wanted to. You could not pass it. It would get the default value true. If you passed null, it would catch it with a improved error message, which is like, rather than waiting for it to arrive at that particular location, it would say, actually, this is a non-null Boolean variable, and therefore you cannot pass null to it. Since we did this like 4 years ago, it's entirely possible that plenty of people are still hitting this problem. Maybe what we should have done then, and what we could consider doing now, is introducing a validation rule and sort of like reframe this back compatibility thing to say, this validation rule is not a must. This validation rule is a should. And the validation rule in this case is like, there's I think we have like an implicit allowance of this via the validation, where we have like the explanation for it. Oh, actually, no, this is the right validation rule. All variable usages are allowed. And so like that could be the other way around this, which is there's like either like an addition to this or something that you could like flip a flag. Like I can imagine a config flag in GraphQL.js where you intentionally turn this off because you've been reliant on this behavior. And then once you've like fixed all your clients, or whatever, you can turn it on. Or if you're going to go build a new system on day one, like you've never had to think about this problem ever. It's just fixed right out of the gates.
Yeah, there is something like looking towards the future where I think now that we have default values, we have bang or non-nullable variables and nullable variables. I think looking towards the future, it would be really clean. Sorry about that. It would be really clean if the type was always had to be compatible with the usage. And then the default variable tells you whether or not you are required. If there is no default variable, then you are required to pass that variable, like to pass a value. And like to be backwards compatible, we could allow that to coerce to, oh, if you don't pass a value, it's null. But like when I'm thinking through specifically fragment arguments, if we don't require passing values for arguments that are defined with no default value, then it's possible to break scope locality. And it'll be a weird thing with fragment arguments that they like. What a default value means is whether or not you are required to include it. Whereas on the query level or operation level, it means like, it doesn't mean semantically the same thing. But that would require like multiple stages of should, must, flags.
I'm more nervous about changing the semantics of what it means to have a default value. I think I remember a couple of years ago working through that and trying to explore every corner case of exactly how to get the behavior right.
I think if we were starting from scratch, I think that's the behavior, but like it's definitely the backwards compatibility. Like if we ever cut a like you must version to be backwards compatible release, I think that that's what we would want to do. So there's like, maybe we need just like a list of things that we would do if we were cutting like a new, if we said this spec, if your server follows this spec, it is not compatible with the old.
Yeah, I don't know. We've had a principle for a while that we want to make sure long-lived servers continue to be viable. I think our primary tool around that has been to introduce things as shoulds, where we have like very clear language that the only reason why you would not do the should is backwards compatibility for an existing service. And then that way it becomes clear that an implementation would want some kind of tool there to like, if you did nothing, the should is followed. But you, like a must, you would not expect a user of a library to disable a must, but a should, you might expect, depending on the sophistication of your library, a user to be able to disable the should, especially if there's like a provided reason in the spec itself, as opposed to just saying like any spec prior to this date is like unlikely to continue to work because of this change. I don't think we can do that.
Can we like reverse language, meaning like we describe future like behaviors that we want, and how like appendix said, but if you need for like legacy reason. So I think like reversing order, because like currently everybody was confused because like Benji right, this problems exist, but it took us some time to find like a piece that said it's intentional. Maybe it's worth to as a policy. Actually, it's a good suggestion for second topic about editorial guide, is to have like behavior we want to be implemented first, and historical notes or like legacy as appendixes.
Yeah.
And but basically will solve issue, because like people implementing from scratch, because what happened right now, Benjamin writing it from scratch, so he reading like line by line, following the spec, and he implementing like old behavior, problematic behavior, instead of like behavior that we want implementation implement, unless they need backward compatible to be backward compatible. So
is like an action item here for this specific case, put the should, like make the default algorithm use should, and then have an appendix, have like outside of that, if you need for backwards compatibility, this is
yeah, and implement by
Yeah.
default in GraphQL.js. So like you can disable it, but you need to do something to disable it. And what's like matching changes, which actually will prove if it's a big issue or not, similar to how JavaScript has principle not to break the web. And it's like tested with assumption, with principles tested by having Chrome and Mozilla release features and like seeing if they break anything or not. So doing like reverse in spec text and reverse in like implementing the GraphQL.js and having it on by default will solve issue.
Yeah. I wish it was easy as reversing the language around. Like the tricky part here is that there's like an explicit step in the algorithm which produces this behavior on purpose. And I don't know that we have any other examples of cases where we say, please disregard the next step by default, unless you're doing some sort of compatibility mode. Like that's just like inherently weird. Not saying that I don't think that we should do it categorically, but I'm curious to see like if we're gonna actually employ this idea, let's do the reversal. The default behavior is the right one. There's language that describes the back compatibility mode. If we were to look at the actual spec text change of that, would we go, oh, this is a lot worse than what we had before? I'd be curious to exactly see what
actually
that looks like.
We have like a couple examples, not in algorithms, but in general, like about extensions in errors. We had iterator after like 1.0 release, and it says the same. So like you can put whatever properties inside errors as you want, but it's recommended you to use extension. But for legacy servers, it's normal to maybe like, and we also, I don't remember, probably we have it in the spec that the errors should precede the data. I think I did that PR, and it was also later. So maybe like have like special like banner saying like legacy compatibility, because like we have like from top of my mind, we already have 3 examples of like maybe appendix, maybe it's just separate appendix saying like if you need the legacy, refer to this appendix, and it's have like clear text, please skip this step, an example like a problem, behavior, and everything else. Separate appendix wouldn't make text hard to read, it like most people don't care or wouldn't care about legacy. So moving into appendix and just having there to have like technically non-breaking releases would be good.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to adding an appendix around this. I think I'm like usually biased to keeping the language as close together as possible and as pithy as it needs to be to get the point across, but something worth exploring as we write it out. Benji, you had this reproduced example code. What's actually the result? Like you have the
result
logs
is
and
it
console
throws
dir.
the field
Can you-
error.
Yeah, I'm curious what text we get out of that field error.
Oh, okay.
You know what I mean?
Did I not put that in? Okay.
Yeah, I'm just very curious about console dir and console log outcomes.
Yeah, cool. Give me a second. I'll actually spin it up.
Yeah, no sweat. Part of that is I'm thinking like, as we are evaluating this one, we should think about the like net improvement in developer experience versus the like potential for chaos of the change. I think it's probably right to make the change. I think we probably like over pivoted to allowing the back compat case last time as the default mode. But just curious.
So the error is argument numbers has invalid value 1. Oh, hang on. This might, I think this script might have a bug in it.
Can you post it in the chat? It would be easier to read it.
Yeah, sure. We'll do that. It does come with a stack trace, I'm afraid.
For that. Where was I? So I think, where's this? There we go. This line in that algorithm, I think is the like one in question. But I'd be curious. We'd need to gut check that. Thanks for getting that in the comment, Benji. GraphQL error. Yeah. That certainly doesn't help you, does it? What we should really like, ideally, if we're going to handle that edge case, we were putting the work in to say, basically like make it appear the same as a variable error. It's just like you catch it late instead of catching it early. But anyway, I think this line 3 is variable usage allowed is probably the one that needs the change. I'm curious, like what is the backwards incompatible but like idealized version that just the step 3 just straight up doesn't exist? I think that's right. Yeah, algorithms are kind of weird to add should or may language in them because they kind of like either are the algorithm or they aren't, which is I think the quirkiness that's like running me through a loop a little bit here. So I don't know exactly how to frame the language around that, but you know, maybe there's a way to kind of position that third step as like being dependent on some environmental decision about backwards compatibility.
Or have is variable usage strictly allowed as like a separate rule, and then have like should and must. Like is variable usage strictly allowed? If you do that, that encompasses is variable usage allowed, but you are allowed to just do is variable usage allowed. I don't know.
Yeah, there's something around that.
I would suggest, like, instead of making it trickier for people who don't care about legacy, can we just have is variable allowed legacy inside appendix, and beneath is variable allowed, we have like a banner saying, if you care about legacy things, you need to implement is variable usage allowed legacy, which is described in the appendix, which is copy paste with small change. I'm like GraphQL already tricky as it is without like putting stuff, historical stuff into algorithms. If we start designing algorithms around like that, it's I'm like for copy pasting and putting it at appendix and having like a note saying, if you care, please read there. With modified algorithm, an example of like input and output, and what's the problem?
I think that's probably right. Like there's this top line one is variable usage allowed. And then somewhere in this exact sort of, specific section is sort of a highlight that there's an element of this that may be incompatible with previous versions of GraphQL. And if that's the case, refer to this appendix, and that appendix has, and it's like explicitly says, in that case, is variable usage allowed is replaced by is variable usage allowed legacy. And it's just a duplicate of that particular step.
It's strictly only if you have legacy queries that are being used with, like, if you are writing a server from scratch, you do not need to worry about this. If you have clients in existence that will make requests on your server, they don't want to break.
Backwards compatibility with existing queries or existing requests. Yeah. Okay. I think that's directionally right. The nice thing about that is, Yvonne, to your point, this section ends up actually getting simpler, because in addition to the algorithms here being overly complicated because of this edge case, there's also this like exception element to the explanatory text, which is less than ideal. So we've got to have some element there because we need something that points to the appendix that kind of frames up the fact that this isn't an exception that you should be aware of and go here to read the details. And then we need that thing. I don't have a strong opinion about whether it is an appendix versus whether it is just like at the bottom of this particular thing is like an addendum that's like within section. I think there's something nice about it just like being kind of immediately there. And we only have 2 appendices, and adding a third one, I don't know, for this, like, this would be like the only thing in it is maybe a little bit strange, but I get the desire.
Whilst we're on this topic, partly this issue comes down to that line in the execute algorithm, in the coerce, no, not variable values, the other one, coerce argument values. Yeah, coerce argument values, that says, if value cannot be coerced according to the input coercion rules of argument type, raise a field error. Now, for variables have already been coerced once. So we're now doing a secondary coercion of them, possibly. I'm not sure exactly. Whereas the other values that might be fed into an argument would be like, the static values that are in the document, right? The variable has been coerced already. So it's not like, a string or abstract representation. It is what that input type should already be. And we are then coercing it again. Is there any reason why a variable would need to have this additional recoercion other than this nullability?
Yes. Specifically, you have an old client, you shipped a breaking change on your schema, and having that extra coercion means that we don't just, like, if I pass a number, an int, into something that now expects a string, we can still do the coercion, even though the basically, even though at the query level we have it as like, if we have old queries that have passed previous versions of our validation and we're not running validation against them, we can still do something semi-intelligent.
Okay, that makes sense. Let me rephrase the question. If the query is valid against the current version of the implemented spec, is there any other situation other than this nullability? Because your example was of not validating it because you've previously done that on an older version, right?
There might be, for instance, you can have your variable that is used in a list location be a single item. And I think we still need to do the coercion at the field level there.
Yeah, you'd still coerce that, but you wouldn't actually coerce the variable value. You would, well, maybe you would. Yeah, it's kind of, yeah. Okay, good point. Thank you. We should probably move on.
Wait, Deji, I think you might have been like fully misunderstanding that particular line, if I'm understanding the thing you're framing here. Because as we're going through course argument values, so there's like, okay, I'm looking at 5F, which is 5 is looping through all your arguments and then looking at each one. F is the particular case where you've provided a value, or sorry, a variable. And in that case, we set value to be the thing that was actually provided as that variable. And then the rest of the algorithm kind of continues, which means you get then to 5J.
It's 5JI that we hit. Yeah, I remember writing this
Yeah,
down.
and then 5JI is like, okay, value, which could have come from a bunch of cases. Like it could have come from the default, it could have come from the value being provided at runtime, it could have come from a variable, but like either way, if it's null, or actually, yeah, 5I is the case that's like, in particular for like, if you have a value and the value is null and it's a non-nullable type, like here's the moment to raise a field error. Otherwise you continue and you add stuff in. And then that like 5J dot triple I is the case where it is neither null nor a variable. Like that's the scenario where you've got just a typical value that's been provided and you need to do the coercion. So I don't think we're doing double coercion of variables as a result. Did that follow? That makes sense.
If that's true, doesn't that mean we're adding a null here and we are opening ourselves to a null pointer issue?
No,
If
because
you
5I means 5I explicitly says if the argument type is non-nullable and either there is no value, has value is not true.
But the value
or
isn't null, it's a variable.
The value is null, then we're raising a field error, which means by the time we get to 5J, the assumption
because it's
is
value, not argument value. Yeah.
By the time we get to 5J, the assumption is that we've already gotten past that particular problem where either it's a non-nullable type and the value is not null because we've passed 5I, or it is non-nullable, in which case like 5JI can apply. Like is value is null. It's like a scenario which could occur.
Yes,
and so
that's
like
where the field error is.
It's like a little bit happenstance that we've lifted null out. I think like a way that we could simplify this a little bit is to say that like there's one scenario that it's a variable, in which case you don't have to worry about it at all because it's already been checked. Otherwise it's a value, in which case you have to like apply the coercion rules, including you have to do the null check first and then you do apply the coercion rules. So we could potentially rewrite this algorithm to be simpler. And so this is sort of like we need to handle the null case for variables because of the edge case. We need to handle the null case for values just because you have to do that. And it's the same step. So instead of repeating ourselves, we've just added the very first step is look to see if it's null and then continue. So I think there's a flavor of what you're saying that's on the nose, which is like, hey, if we didn't have to worry about this edge case, would this algorithm get simpler? And I think the answer is yes. But I don't know that it would get so much simpler that it'd be worth having the same sort of discussion that we had before about here's the primary algorithm and here's the legacy algorithm that handles the edge case. Like, I think that ended up being actually more complicated.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think I read value and actually in my head read argument value rather than value. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, thanks for pointing out my mistake there as well. Good. Can I also suggest that maybe we add another note below the note here in section 641 that harkens back to the note that already exists in the validation section? Because, for example, when I've been writing my execution engine, I've been using GraphQL JS's validation system because all I care about is execute. So I haven't been reading validation closely. It would be nice to point back
I think
there.
that's right. Yeah, I think that's probably right.
Cool.
There's at least the one note there that points to the coercion of variable values. Maybe it's worth mentioning also that there's like a validation rule there, and then that's the right pointer. But I think you're right. There needs to be a note.
Awesome. Should we move on?
Yeah.
Is that so? That's the action item for this, or is there more to record in the notes here? That issue.
I think there's two action items. One is that small note piece, and then the primary one is the having the alternative legacy, like just doing the swap. The default mode is our happy path.
Yep.
And there's some spec text that needs to get proposed. That will probably be not super obvious as to how to write it, but that's okay.
Great, thank you.
Okay, my blood pressure is lower now after talking that through. I was like, oh shit, didn't we fix that? Not a security hole. Okay, thank God. Okay, style guide. This is a fun question. Benji, go nuts.
Yay. Me again, guys. So Roman pointed out that we had some inconsistencies in capitalization of, I don't know what to call them, but the headers that are just bold where they aren't numbered, the unnumbered headers, if you will. And he raised a pull request, which we discussed last week, to fix the case there, which I had approved previously back in August, because I was like, yeah, make them consistent, seems reasonable. Anyway, following yesterday's discussion, I actually did last week's discussion, sorry, I actually did a bit more of a dig, and we have an interesting mix of capitalization in the spec. And it seems like something that it would be nice to just guide people that are, so that there is one correct answer. So I went through and there is a comment that I've left on that linked issue that lists out, it's ridiculous, but I went through, I used grep and then I organized things manually, but it lists through all the places where we use title case, where we use what could be title case, but it uses keywords and maybe we've just capitalized keywords and it looks like title case, sentence case, and sentence case, but where we have capitalized keywords, and also just where there's one word titles. And there's a big mixture of all of them. So there was no very clear thing, but I went through, had a look into some style guides and stuff like that. And I think that we most closely match the AP style guide, which I think is used in various bits of like technical publishing. So I propose that we use the rules there, or at least we use our own rules that are based on those. So I have written us a very basic style guide, just as a starting point effectively. And then I've gone through and I've fixed every heading in the spec, not just the unnumbered headings, but the numbered headings as well, to then follow this style guide. And then hopefully that can put this issue to bed. And from now on, we'll just have somewhere to point that says, here's what you do.
Seems legit. The style guide that I most often refer to is the Chicago style guide. I don't know the AP style guide, but they all copy each other.
So the reason that I
so
didn't
they
go with
do.
the Chicago style guide, which I do like, is because it talks about, I think it always uses I forget the keywords like prepositions and conjunctions, no matter how long they are. And I think that that might be problematic for non-native speakers to know specifically, is this word a preposition or a conjunction? Whereas the AP style guide only applies to conjunctions and prepositions under 4 letters in length. So like there is a concrete list of them in this style guide, which I think makes things a bit easier.
Having a concrete list is great for us programmer types who just want a freaking white list of words to not capitalize. Oh, Vale has a good one. Cool. Yeah, I love anything that we could just rule away, because I can guarantee you that the reason why we're inconsistent is because predominantly I wrote it, and then find myself being inconsistent about title casing all the time. As you're just, this is like, Benji, get out of my head. You're like my English teacher from grade school. But yeah, I think this is right. Though I noticed, I don't know, maybe I'm overlooking at your before and after. I'm seeing ARE not getting lowercased within the title casings. And some other ones it seems like the before and after are still not. Is that right?
R's and is's are title case now. Ins are not.
In is not, is, yeah, and are is.
Yeah, I don't know. That just seems weird to me. Like are in, I would expect both, like directives are invalid locations. I would expect are in to be lowercase, since they're both
The
less than
verbs.
4 letter.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe I just don't know how to apply the style guide. Cool. I'm happy to delegate to someone who is better at English than myself.
One of the reasons that I chose the AP is because there is just this list. It's for, and, nor, but, or, yet. So, as, if, in, at, to, on, off, of, for, versus, and per. Those words get lowercase. Everything else is uppercase. That's basically the rule.
Yeah.
There are some
Love
minor
it.
exceptions where one of those words gets used not as a conjunction or preposition, but let's not go into those.
Let's delegate to the professional journalists on this one. I'm all for it.
Definitely.
Cool.
Is this something like, what's the preservation of this going forward? Like, do we add Veil? Do we add a tool?
I think it
here?
would be very cool to add a lint tool that can lint SpecMD to apply these styles. But as far as I know, there isn't one currently.
What about, I haven't looked at Veil before, but that's the one that Yvonne just linked.
Oh, awesome. I literally never heard of it.
No.
I hadn't either. So cool
Yeah,
tab.
it's
It's got a
pretty
great list of
popular.
logos that are people who are using it.
Sounds good. Well, I can take that as an action item to look into if you want.
Yeah, because it'd be nice to not just, because I think we did the same thing for spelling, right? Where we applied a spell checker as a lint step with some like GraphQL specific words in our whitelist or allow
I'm
list.
all for taking it out of the hands of humans and putting it into the hands of machines.
Because otherwise I'm just going to screw it up again, man, and I'm going to have to hear from my English teacher again.
One suggestion, Benji, is in your styled guide markdown file. Maybe mention that this is based on the AP style guide so that we can defer a lot of questions around why did you pick this way or not pick this way. We can just say, hey, we're following the AP style guide as much as possible.
Yeah, I deliberately didn't do that, but yeah, I am happy to do that if everyone is in consensus that we should. I was sort of like, it's based on that, but like,
yeah,
I don't know what the rules are of actually like explicit. I honestly don't know what the rules are around it.
Got it. Okay.
I had the same thought. It's like, the more we can make our style guide short by saying we defer to these other style guides, it's like auto formatting. We're not gonna write anything. We run the prettier tool. Like run the prettier tool, whatever it says is what goes. And it's like grammar and spelling. It's like we run this spell checker and this grammar checker, which this one is based on AP. And it's just like done.
Totally. Yeah.
And then the other thing I think to be just some of this stuff is maybe repetitive of what SpecMD does for us. So whether it's worth kind of capturing the style guide or otherwise, it's kind of up to you. Like the numbered headings bit is you quickly learn if you do it the wrong way because the spec text comes out wonky. But otherwise, it looks great.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Okay, cool. I'm happy to move on.
Sweet. Just lost
the
my
first stream.
agenda file. Really,
We're going to talk about the
briefly.
first stream.
Yeah, let's do that.
So Rob, if you want to
Yeah.
give us a summary of the last meeting we had.
Yeah, we met earlier this week, a bunch of us talking specifically about the issue that's linked here. Clients can't reliably distinguish if defer was or stream was inline or not. We talked a good amount of time about the proposal that Matt made a while back about an is fulfilled field that'll let you know if a fragment is inline or not. If a fragment was returned as part of the response. And I think we ultimately decided against going in that direction. Kind of feel that we need some kind of additional data that's returned on the response because that is fulfilled field isn't going to help you for stream. Benji has a proposal of approach for this, kind of a further iteration on what me and then Yvonne had posted. And so, yeah, I'm going to hand it off to him and he can walk us through it.
Awesome. Hi again, folks. So yeah, this is very much based on, standing on the shoulders of giants, as it were. This is just another iteration on top of all the ideas that everyone else has come up with. I think most recently, possibly Ivan's proposal of having a way of tracking, I forget what keyword you used, Ivan.
Has next. Yeah, reuse it has next inside.
Yeah, so like detailing which things are still to come effectively. What my proposal does, the easiest way to think of it, and I'm afraid this is going to be JavaScript centric, but if you think of it as every defer is effectively a promise and every stream is effectively an async iterable, it is detailing to the client that those things exist, giving them an ID and saying, there is a defer, there is a promise that we've created for this deferred thing. It's going to be at this path and it's going to come later. That way, if you don't get that in the payload and you've already got like a placeholder for it, like a null or whatever, then you know that thing's not coming. That's fine. Same for streams. So a stream, you might say, give me initially 2 items. You've got a list there with 2 items. You don't know whether or not that's finished or not. If there is no new, like I've just created a stream for this in that same payload saying at this path, we have created a stream that it will be, satisfied later, then we know that's not streaming. What this then allows us to do is it means that we can, on a whim, decide to defer or not defer to stream or to not stream at any position, not just on a particular individual directive, but on an incantation of that directive. So if you're inside of a stream and you've got a defer directive, you could defer like the first 10 times that comes up and then inline the next 10, and that would be fine. So this is quite valuable for that, which allows the server then to, rather than having to at validation time decide whether to allow or not allow the query or whether to just ignore all streams and defers, we can sort of build up this list until we say, there's enough pending things now. We're just going to inline everything else, which is one of the issues that we've been discussing quite a lot, actually, the risk of like this explosion on the server side and also transport level. Also, as part of this, and this is a bit of a change, a significant change, I think, is we detail that these like promises, async iterables exist, and we give them an ID, which I'm proposing is just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, doesn't really matter. And then when those things come through, we just give you the ID. We just say, here is the thing for ID 7, rather than giving you the path to it. That does mean that you need to keep track on the client side of what they all are. But by doing so, especially for streams, we don't need to give you the path every single time, which reduces the amount of transfer on the network. It also reduces the amount that you have to serialize in server memory. But also on the client, it means we don't have to do this comparison of the path. We don't need to traverse each time and say, oh, we've got a path, let's find that point. We can just keep in memory, here is a link to position 7. And then when a new item comes, we just go, okay, position 7.push, and we add it onto our array, which is, I think, much more efficient. So there's a few things like that in there. The other thing is removing label from streams because we don't need them. I don't think we need them. We can sort of merge all of the streams on the same field together. And then we can identify any individual defer or stream incantation like promise or async iterable by the combination of its path and its list of defer labels that it's seen. If a defer doesn't have a label, then we just give it the null label. That is essentially it. That was a lot of words.
This is an interesting proposal. The element of this I think is really interesting is the mental model of these as promises or tasks or async iterable. Basically, like, we're giving you the information that there exists such a thing at a particular path with a particular identifier. And then later, as we tell you more, we're essentially updating you on that state for that thing. That's pretty nice. And it makes sense to me as to why, like, moving path up then is actually kind of nice. It's like you're saying there exists a promise at this path. It'll get resolved later. Are labels and reasons still useful here? Like, I'm looking at labels with an empty list and labels with an array of null. I'm like, even in this example, I'm like, I don't understand how a client is going to take advantage of these things. Or like, the reason is this, how is the client behavior going to look at that reason and do something meaningfully different?
Yeah, I don't think the reason is actually required. I would need to check. No, I'm not sure offhand. I just put it in there because it was a nice bit of extra information and gives us space to expand this in future if we had another thing that wanted to make use of incremental delivery but wasn't a defer or a stream, because it may have its own semantics. The labels and the path are necessary in order to uniquely identify which thing it is that triggered this. Or something like that.
And labels is but why these values? Like, I would have assumed that because you defer a particular fragment, that it either has a label or it does not have a label. So I would expect either there exists a field called label and it's a string, or there does not exist a field called label. But like them being an array and an array that can contain null, I was like, what does it mean to have an array of null? And if streams don't have labels, then why does it have a label entry here?
So the stream needs a label entry so that you can uniquely identify the stream. If the stream is inside of a defer, for example, or inside of another stream with a defer, actually Yakov has an example of this that makes it more obvious. His comment should be visible, but I'll send you the link to it.
So is labels sort of like describing part of the path?
You've got essentially two paths, right? You've got the path in the response body, which is like, me and then friends and then 0, right? I'm the first friend. But then you have also the path through the defers, because the defers can have labels, because you could have like 2 forked versions of me that are in separate defers because they have separate labels. I mean, I would prefer that nothing has labels, but we still want labels for various things. We actually, this is one of the things I think Rob didn't mention. We did consider getting rid of label entirely, but there is a desire to keep it because there may be a situation where you have one thing, you want your initial render to be like, 25 milliseconds, you've got another thing that takes 2 seconds and another thing that takes 10 seconds. And you might want to defer those two separately and not have them effectively merged together. As such, both of those might be inside of the friend stream. So you might have 2 incantations of the friend stream, which are at the exact same path in the response document, the final document that we're building, but they've come through 2 different defer paths. So we need to know which one of those we're talking about.
So my original understanding of this in terms of a problem to be solved was that as we were then basically this original problem that you're describing of like modeling these as promises or async iterables, conceptually, you need to then know which of those things are in what state, and label would give us a tool to do that. But your introduction here of an identifier, like the GraphQL server will just give you a nonce style identifier to do these, seems more resilient because it can be smart to make sure that if there actually are multiple, or if you forgot to label a thing, like we can still uniquely identify these. And that is actually, you need path to figure out where you're merging the data in. But you need ID to respect the fact that at any given path, there might be multiple of these things that are active and that you're like tracking collectively. But if I was going to like spin this around from the point of view of a client, it's less clear to me how, like and Matt, maybe this is more of a question for you. It's like, if I'm going to build a smart client like Relay or something like it, for labels and reason, like what is it that I'm actually doing different? What's the client side problem that solves?
I don't think reason solves the problem. I think label is necessary for knowing which, basically, if I have multiple defers at the same level, I need to be able to uniquely identify which of those 3 promises we're talking about.
But why? And why is the identifier not enough?
Because they all have the exact same field path.
Right, but like if I'm building a React app and I've got 2 things deferred at the same path, and under the hood I've got identifiers for each, so I know which one is in what state, then like what's my client developer API that is like relevant here? You know what I mean?
How do you have an identifier without adding a label into the defer directive?
The identifier, because that's just like the particular instance of that, in the same way that if you had defer with no label at all, like you can just trace it through as you execute, and like each one that you hit is ID1, ID2, ID3, ID4. Like that makes sense to me.
Yeah, basically you either need to have some field included that says, yes, this thing was fulfilled, which is kind of how we sort of sometimes do it now, but not always. Or you need, I actually don't like the splitting out the labels from the field path, because in my mind, the label actually is part of the path, because as soon as you hit one of these promises, you're saying that it is actually a separated out subtree. And anytime we have a unique subtree, that subtree should have a unique path. So in my view, the label actually belongs as part of the field path.
But then you're double dutying the field path, because the path, field path, not like response path, because path here means the response path. Like where in the response am I merging the resulting data?
Yeah, so the path is
So-
like the final document that you're building. That
Yeah.
just says where in that is it, whereas the
Where in the-
labels kind of is the runtime, like which of the various streams has this data come from, because many of them can write to the same path.
Yeah, but the like, if yeah, let me.
That's
Sorry.
I mean, maybe this is, I hope this isn't like too much of an insane thing to ask for, but like an imagined client API. Like I'm wondering, like, what is the next generation of Relay user see? Like, what's the motivation for a client developer to include or not include a label? Because right now we've said labels are optional. So one is the scenario in which I add a label, and what does it allow me to do that I can't do without adding a label? And I don't have a good mental model for that. Maybe you do, but I haven't seen that
So
particular piece.
we were discussing if there are no labels or the labels are the same, it actually means that we merge the selection sets together into the same response, into the same like promise.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Which is why I have the mental model of like, the label indicates that this is a unique promise, and therefore.
So would it be valid to say I have two separate defers that have the same label on them in a response? Like, that's not an invalid query. And what that means is that there's a single conceptual promise getting created with like two branches of the query that are getting added into that. That's the right. Okay.
Yeah, and there is an example of that in it's the second code block. I've got a whole bunch of defers with different labels, some without labels, some with labels, and then I detail that actually that boils down to effectively 4 different defers and what their like identifiers are. There's then a more full one in the pending section that shows you how it interacts with streams, which may help answer the previous question you had as well.
Yeah, and this is actually.
I'm still okay. Sorry, go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, this is why in the identifier, like the path for the identifier, in my opinion, like when we have should be field path interleaved with labels, and maybe we have like a special like hashtag or something for labels in there to indicate that they're not fields, but that gives you basically the unique subtree, a path to the unique subtree.
Yeah. That makes sense to me. I think the innovation that I really like about Benji's proposal here is, does this give us the ability to just ignore all of that? Like rather than having to come up with some like hash of multiple pieces of data, we're just like, this is the first one, this is the second one. And you like, just don't need to think that hard about field paths interleaves with labels and like where these things live. You're just like, there exists a promise. It's called ID1. And when the data comes back, here's where it's going to go. And that's why I'm asking about, so, okay, the use case of a label to distinguish separate logical defers makes a ton of sense to me. Like, here's 2 chunks and I actually need to separately defer them. It's not okay to like scoop them all up and defer them in one batch. I want to explicitly have them be 2 separate batches. So I'll come up with like label the first batch and label the parallel batch. And it's like, great, I got labels. Now I know that the runtime behavior is going to do what I expect. What is less clear to me is that as a client developer, that I need to know that there's like some array of labels that I've hit along the way. Like, I wonder if that's an artifact of like in a previous iteration, you needed both of these 2 pieces of information to uniquely identify which promise are you talking about. But I wonder if like, is that an artifact that's left behind, but like this ID thing is just way simpler and we could just do that? Or is there like a separate reason to have the client have access to label?
Yeah, an alternative would be if each deferred fragment had the ability to put into the response an inline key indicating like, hey, this key, so I'm deferring fragment foo, so I put in line a like fragment foo deferred or whatever, colon.
Well, and that's
the
why I'm
ID
asking,
identifier.
yeah, like what's the, like if I'm a Relay end user developer, what kind of rough API am I working with? Like, is there an API that gives me access to the fact that there are labeled deferred fragments within the context of my container, and that like I can ask questions about which of those are pending and which of those are fulfilled, in which case I need to know the label so that I can provide that Relay API? Or
Yeah.
is
You
that
either
not a
need-
thing that exists?
You either need to do it to have in the response inline some key that indicates this, or you need the pending indicators, which we can, a Relay client is able to basically stitch these pending indicators into the local context.
Yeah. Part of the reason why I'm asking for that explicit use case is I think that it will inform the relevant data necessary to empower it. And I worry that right now it's a little bit of, we don't know, so we're going to throw all the data. And that might mean that the intended use case is actually unnecessarily complicated by the fact of having to dig through a thing to find the right piece of information. And it may be benefit, and also it's like extra stuff in the payload, you know, like I also worry about the scenario where the defer ends up, the juice isn't worth the squeeze, right? Like you do all the defers and you find out that all this overhead of like tracking promises actually just negated the performance gain that you got from having done the defer in the first place. And certainly like tracking a bunch of metadata is one of the reasons why that could be true.
Stick it in line. But that would
and
be
like in particular, I know I'm over rotating on this, but like in particular, I'm looking at the example, I'm seeing like labels array with null. And I'm just like, I can't imagine any client that's like going to look at that and be like, thank God I got that information. Like now I know exactly what to do. It's like, it seems there's something that feels off about that as like the preferred payload shape.
It's just
So
Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, I just want to describe what Relay does now, according to my understanding, which I think is like, let's say you have your component that has fragments, nothing's deferred so far. In line to that, you have that component's rendering two other components. Both of those have fragments. They're both deferred. And with React, you wrap each one in a suspense boundary. Relay is behind the scenes, automatically generates the labels. And when each payload comes back, it knows which of the components to not be suspended anymore. And what I'm most not sure about with this proposal is the merging of the labels, because before it was kind of like an implementation detail. The client like code could just handle all of it for you. But now there's is some specific meaning of, do you want them to be merged together or not? So I think it requires a developer to specify them. And I think the problem that we're solving, which must be an issue with Relay, is that if you have these two fragments that are deferred and one of them is inlined, Relay doesn't understand that it was inlined, so it's probably going to be suspending both of them until the entire request is finished.
Yeah, Relay solves this by not inlining.
Yeah,
our server solves this by always expanding every single deferred fragment, which is fine internally, but as soon as you're opening it up to broader usages, it's not a good. I agree with all the reasons why we should be able to inline part of the response. It's not a good state, which is to say we don't actually have a solution currently, which is why we're going through these iterations.
What Rob's saying resonates. It is surprising to me that Relay, if the behavior is that by default all defers at a particular level or a particular path in the query get merged, which makes sense to me. I think that would be the right expected behavior, is like, these are the set of things that I would like to defer. And then there's like a later single defer that includes them all. Unless that you explicitly state otherwise, and then label is the tool for doing that. Like that provides semantic value. But if that's the case, then it would be surprising to me that Relay would generate them, because by generating them, it could influence that intent.
So to be clear, that is not the behavior today.
Okay.
That's
the
part of
behavior
Benji's
today
proposal.
is each defer each defer must have a unique label. And each defer always gets a unique payload.
Mm-hmm.
So my main motivation for this is I don't want to be specifying labels. I want to use defer and stream myself, not in Relay. And I want to be able to not specify any labels anywhere. And I want it to work. And I want it to work efficiently. So for me, I think all the defers should be able to merge together if they've all got the same label, i.e. no label. All the streams should be able to merge together, and you end up with something really simple. All you care about is where in the response body the various bits of data go, which is why the path is straightforwardly, here is where in the final document this data goes, which is why the path is not built out of the two parts. Instead, we've pulled the labels out. So if your client does care, and if it does have this forking behavior where it's got a list and it's deferred two things, and it wants to render one only when it's got all of the data for that one, and the other one only when it's got all the data for that one, then the labels allow you to determine which of those two you're talking about and know whether there's still anything else pending at that position. If there isn't, fantastic, we can render it, whereas this one's still pending. And you don't have this information without, if you're merging all the defers and the streams together, if they've got the same labels, you don't have this information unless you combine both the path and something else. So labels, or like Matt said, like some kind of inline field that we say, hey, there's a promise here, you know, at promise in the response body or something, using a character that cannot be provided any other way. Which, you know, I'm actually totally open to, but that is kind of hard to type, right?
Yeah, that resonates super strongly with me. Sorry, go ahead, Hugh.
Oh, no, I was just going to say we're at time. Did we want to wrap it there? And just know that we have another breakout meeting that's scheduled for this upcoming Monday to talk further about this. So totally up to
I think so. Yeah, let's wrap since we're at time. My closing thought on this one is, Benji, I think this proposal is super interesting, but we got to figure out the label semantics of this stuff. That's the squirreliest bit. And my bid would be any information included here that's like a nice to have, we should slice. That way we can like firmly describe why each piece of information is here.
Lee, I think all of us are on the breakout call for this that's coming up on Monday. Is that something you would like to be invited to, or would you prefer to just have us kind of report back to you?
Please feel free to add me. And
Okay.
It's entirely possible that I might not be able to come if I have a conflict, but I'd rather have the option.
I think you're probably the only West Coast person on the call, so it might be a bit early too, but we'll see. We'll send you the invite anyways.
If I can, I will. And if I can't, then I'll hear about it.
Awesome.
All right, folks. Thanks for the sprightly conversation across a bunch of good topics, and good to see everybody.
Yeah.
If I see y'all next week, then fantastic. Otherwise, I hope everybody has a great holiday season. See y'all soon.
Same to all of you. Thanks very much. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.